Having accepted the petition of Thetis, Zeus sends a murderous dream to Agamemnon, imploring him to muster his army and attack Troy. It is notable that dream is personified, as is dawn as a goddess, and rumor as Zeus's crier. So every once in a while, you'll see that things are capitalized and they're personified into immortals, right?
Yeah.
So Agamemnon receives the dream and shares it with his war council. The high king or chieftain of the Greeks then elects to test his men and tells the army Zeus commands them to return to Argos in disgrace. The men rush to the ships to leave, but Hera sends Athena to intervene. Athena inspires Odysseus, who in turn rouses the men to stay, reminding them of Calchas' prophecy that they would conquer Troy in the 10th year.
10 years.
10 years. It only takes 10 years, right? Hang in, boys. We just finished 9.
Glad
We're
you
in the
didn't tell
10th
them
year.
that up front.
Right. So Nestor, the oldest, good old Nestor, your favorite character,
Yep.
the oldest of the Achaean warlords, encourages the men to stay as well. And notably, Agamemnon only thanks Nestor afterward. There is then a roll call of the Achaean kings. The book ends with a similar roll call for the Trojans, which serves to introduce Prince Hector, commander of the Trojans, and son of Priam, king of Troy.
All right, so if you're just tuning in to Ascend the Great Books podcast, make sure you go check out the first couple episodes we've done. We've done Why Are We Reading the Great Books? We just got done last week talking about book 1 of the Iliad. Before that, we talked about like why even read Homer, like why are we starting to read Homer. So if you haven't check those out, you can go to the Great Books podcast.com. Great URL, thegreatbookspodcast.com. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We did not put a MySpace page up yet. We will see.
We're working on it.
We'll work on that. So we're going into the treacherous book 2. It is, I think, don't you think that book 2 has a reputation?
Yeah, in certain ways. Maybe like where first readers go to die and quit might be a good way. I think some of them make it through book 1 with all of its twists and turns, if you will, to borrow that phrase. Mm-hmm. And then they make it through
well
book...
played.
Thank you.
I like that.
Yeah. And then they make it to book 2, and then about halfway through, they're like, why am I reading this book?
This is the worst.
Yeah. Now, you had, so not to put you on the spot, but like, so this is your first read-through,
Correct.
right? You're reading it, obviously with Ascend. Mm-hmm. But this was not your first attempt to read. Because book 2 was already notorious when you came into it this time, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So this would be the third attempt to go through the Iliad. The first time I actually audiobooked it or attempted to audiobook it, which I know you're not a big fan of, and I died in I think book 4. I think I stopped at book 4. I did not really even listen to book 2. I mean, I listened to it, but I don't know anything. Like I could not even tell. At the end of it, if you said, "What was that about?" I was like, "You know what? I have no idea." And so then I was like, "Nope, I need to read it." And then I made the mistake of getting the wrong translation, which we've talked about, the importance of having the right translation. Made that mistake. And so I knew the only way I was going to read the Iliad and get a lot out of it would be if I read it with a group of other guys, to hold me accountable, to also get, draw things out that I wouldn't have picked up on. And so anyway, this is I'm going to make it through this time. I'm going to persevere.
Good. Yeah. So we have our Sunday Great Book group, our little small group that we're running. We're getting together and reading this text as well.
Do you think we should have different podcasts every once in a while to break it up on like how to host, a Great Books podcast or a Great Books club?
How to host a Great Books podcast.
Yeah.
We just started. Here's our advice.
We know all about it.
Right. No, I think that we should explore. I think we've talked about it like in little ways, but I think we probably should do an episode that actually dives into like how to host one yourself. Right. So like,
what does the hospitality look like? What is the atmosphere that you should create? What is the importance of inviting people who have never read it versus also people who have read it? Like, there's a lot of different things that I think we should pay attention to in order to generate a good group.
Yeah, I think we'll get into hospitality. I think that's certainly one. I think the other one too is a certain humility, right? So Homer is the teacher. We're coming to him to learn. You don't have to. I think the thing that actually precludes people the most from starting these kind of great books, and some of the commentary that we receive online and that I get on Twitter and things like this, are people who want to start reading it, right? It's like, I want to read the Iliad, or I want to read the Republic or something. But they don't have any support structure. They don't know, like, they don't, and also because our education's kind of suffers great privations, like they don't have any liberal arts tradition to pull from. And so I think, like we've talked about, I think one of the reasons that like we even started Ascend is simply to help people like have an avenue, have an infrastructure, a tool set to actually have these conversations, right? So like you can just read it along with us, right? You can listen to the podcast, like you can look at our guide, right? So like, for instance, every book, right, we're going to open up with a summary of what happened in that, right? So we read that at the beginning. We read that straight off of our guide, right? So here's just a snapshot summary. Here's what happened in this book. Like, how'd you do tracking the text?
In the guide, do you think we can add, and we could create a little macro or something like that to where anytime we say Nestor, it actually puts old man Nestor instead, and we can reference him that way? Good old man Nestor.
So we talk a lot on this podcast about tracking things, like, we need to flag this and track that.
Right.
I'd like to track your love of Nestor and see if it endures some of Nestor's longer speeches. So you want to talk about endurance. Like, sometimes it's like, all right, Nestor, we're in the middle of a war, and this is paragraph 19, and like we've got to wrap this up.
Well, see, this is the beauty. This is how people actually know that I am really reading this with everybody, right? Is because I'm going to say things on here that is clearly I'm going to have to recant later on, right? But you know what? Hey guys, remember when I said that I really liked Nestor?
You nailed the mythology on Hephaestus last episode.
I did, and I got bonus points.
You got bonus points. We haven't even figured out how to cash those in.
But
you got bonus
points.
points.
Yeah.
All right. So the Iliad, it's a book by Homer.
Correct.
We're in the second book or
It's
chapter.
It's by Homer.
Yeah, that was it's okay, so we have to tell that story. It's a real quick story. But we have our Sunday kind of great books. We're reading the Iliad. It's a good group of men. We had 12. And one of the guys is talking about the Iliad. And first he says Hector. First he says that Hector wrote the Iliad, right? And then he has to look at the front of the book. He has to close his book to look at the front to remind himself who actually wrote the Iliad. It was a very charming moment.
In his defense, he realized very quickly it was not Hector. He blanked, and so he had to jog his memory.
But it was only better because he was in the midst of an argument of like, this is my perception of the text, like, which obviously comes with like, I'm doing an attentive reading, like I've noticed these subtleties, and then he blanks on who wrote it.
Right.
Yeah, it was just good.
Classic.
Providence will do that to you.
Yes.
So anyway, okay. So we had our little summary of book 2. Any questions or takeaways just like on the general narrative?
Obviously, I'm going to have questions about the second half of the book.
Okay.
But we'll table that.
Okay. So it starts off, I think, it starts off with a dream. I think it's a good place to kind of have an introduction. So we have this dream, as we mentioned, like Zeus now, right? He is kind of bound to his promise to Achilles' mother, right? Thetis. And so he basically, just to like remind everyone, right? So he's promised that basically the Trojans will have at least a temporary victory, right? We have to be very careful and have narrow confines, I think, on his promises. But they're going to push the Achaeans up against the ships and slaughter them, mainly the point being until Agamemnon's pride breaks and
calls for Achilles. And they have to have some kind of reconciliation. And Achilles is apparently perfectly fine with watching his countrymen be slaughtered for the sake of his pride against Agamemnon's, right? Yes.
So
very little piety.
It's interesting to kind of track through this. So we have the dream. Zeus sends this dream to Agamemnon, and what's like the basic takeaway of the dream?
Well, he tricks him.
Okay.
He tricks Agamemnon. Like he lies to him.
Yeah, so he does lie to him, right? So he basically says, listen, Troy is is ready. It's primed to fall. You're going to be marching on the broad streets of Troy, right? Like I finally have promised you these things, and like you need to attack. Now's the time to attack. So he's goading the Achaeans.
He even brings in Nestor into saying,
yeah, your boy Nestor,
right?
Yeah. So this is a good thing to mention is that the gods, when they speak to people, will often take on the appearance, the voice. This is a dream, but even in the dream, it presents then as Nestor. Like they will present as someone that you know, right? Typically, not always, but typically they will, right? They're more intimate with some people, and on those people, they tend to appear as they are, right? Athena appears as she is to Achilles, right? But a lot of times they take the form of someone. So Dream comes down and tells Agamemnon this in the form of Nestor. Now this one, we get this narrative, or we get a really repetitive narrative. So the dream is told 3 times. Zeus tells the dream, then Dream goes off and gives it to Agamemnon, and then Agamemnon turns around and repeats it to his war council, right, and says, this is the dream that Zeus gave me. Again, sometimes this drives people nuts, but we have to endure. We have to be attentive. And I think one of the things here is that, sure, it's helpful maybe for a bard who has to, repeat these things and is allowing him some time to think about what comes next and things like that. But I also think, as we've mentioned previously, you got to really pay attention when narratives are repeated. Because typically what ends up happening is something is taken away, something's added, a perception is given. And so the cascading effect from Zeus to Dream to Agamemnon to the war council might not all be, one for ones, right? This one I don't think, I'm happy to be pushed back on, but this one I don't think is too terribly, doesn't suffer any kind of discrepancies, if you will. Dream does mention that he pities you now. Right, when he presents in the shade of Nestor, if you will, he says, Zeus pities Agamemnon. That's not a phrase that Zeus uses, right? If memory serves, like Zeus doesn't actually say that. This one's pretty.
I did not pick up on that.
Well, we can actually look real fast, see if I'm right, but I don't think Zeus mentions that he has any kind of pity for Agamemnon. I think it's
he does at the beginning. You mean the first one? It's on line 31. But he says, he has, on line 31, but he has you in his heart, he pities you now. Yeah,
so that's the dream telling that to Agamemnon.
And then on 77 or so, roughly, he also adds it in as Agamemnon.
Correct. So the question is then, is that in the original one that Zeus tells Dream? See, at the beginning of the text.
Okay.
See, so like at the beginning of book 2, right? He says, go murderous Dream to the fast Achaean ships, and once you reach Agamemnon's shelter, rouse him and order him word for word, exactly as I command. Tell Atrides to arm his long-haired Achaeans to attack once more, full in breath. Now he can take the broad seas of Troy. Immortal gods who the Olympics clash no more, which is completely false. Right? There's no peace amongst the gods. Hera's appeals have brought them round, and all agree. Griefs are about to crush the men of Troy.
It comes in the second and third dream. It didn't come in the first, right? So when King Agamemnon was talking about this, he adds that in.
Well, he receives it first from Dream, and then he repeats it to his war council. But Zeus doesn't actually say that he pities him, right? So it's these things, like, again, is there like a giant takeaway here? Probably not. But I think as like...
Shed better light on himself.
Yeah, but even just like from our approach and our skill set and reading the text... These are the types of things that I think we should watch. Like we should note that Zeus really didn't actually say that. That's a commentary from Dream. Because in this text right here, this might be innocuous. Like it doesn't actually mean anything. But in other places in the Iliad or the Odyssey, like that could make a big difference, right? About what the actual war council would know, right? So he tells the war council his dream. And then he does something really interesting. He decides he's going to test the men, a time-honored custom. He will test the men. And so he, Nestor gives his, advice, so that's good for Nestor. And then at 120, a little bit above 120, I just want to make a note that the scepter that Agamemnon has, right, his kingly scepter, is actually made by Hephaestus, as we kind of talked about.
Which the scepter, it symbolizes the power given from Zeus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that in that kind of like in the notes, I believe that's what he says, and Fagel says back in book 1 that the scepter is a symbol of Zeus's power and authority.
Right. Yes. I think that's somewhat ubiquitous, right? I mean, we would look at David, right, has the rod of iron that represents, right, his kingly rule. And so I think the scepter here represents that same thing. It's actually, made by the gods. So let's look at the test, right? So he tests his men. So you get this cascading reiteration of the dream. And now you would think then, what would happen is that there's a fourth one in which he would then tell the men his dream. Right, and tell the armies and say, hey, like, now's the time. But he does almost the exact opposite, right? So look at 130. He says, Kronos' son, so remember Kronos being Zeus' father.
Right, so Zeus.
Right, we also have a cascading patricide throughout Greek mythology, right? So Zeus has overthrown his father. So Kronos' son has trapped me in madness, blinding ruin. Zeus is a harsh, cruel God. He vowed to me long ago, he bowed his head, that I should never embark for home till I had brought the walls of Ilium crashing down, which is another word for Troy, which is why this is called the Iliad, right? It's about Ilium. There's a joke there that the name of this book is actually the Troy story, right? Like Toy Story, right? So if you actually parse out what that means. So, but now I know I really played your role there. Sorry, I gave a pun, but it's not. I said there was a pun that could be made. I did not actually own it too much to myself. So, anyway, the Troy story.
That joke was to infinity and beyond.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on for everyone's sake. So, but now I see only he plotted brutal treachery. Now he commands me back to Argos in disgrace. So basically, then he just tells his men, like,
time to go home.
Yeah, he says, cut and run, sail home to the fatherland we love. We'll never take the broad streets of Troy. So here, Zeus tells him it's time to march, right? He then tells his war council, Zeus gave me a dream, it's time to march, however, I'm going to test the men. And then, he tells them basically the exact opposite.
Ironically, the test is actually more true than not.
Right. One of the questions I think we can ask here is, what is the relationship between the kings and Zeus particularly, right? Like, how does this actually work? Because, as you see, there's a wonderful line here. Let's see, because he gives the dream to his men, and then we see, as we mentioned, right, Athena basically comes rushing down, and then basically Odysseus is like trying to play this role of getting everyone to actually turn around. Like, no, we're not going to do this. Like, you need to be brave. You need to have fortitude. We're going to tell Agamemnon that we're here to fight, right? And so down at like 220, a little bit after 220, he's explaining this, and he has an interesting observation. First, he says, now he's only testing us. Soon he'll bear down hard. Didn't we all hear his plan in secret council? So he's talking to one of the fellow chieftains, right, that actually heard this plan. Like, why are you running back the ship?
Yeah, he's like, you idiots.
Yeah, you knew he was going to test you.
Right.
But God forbid his anger destroy the army he commands. The rage of kings is strong. They're nursed by the gods. Their honor comes from Zeus. They're dear to Zeus, the god who rules the world. Now, what's interesting here is, like, on its face, I think we could just have somewhat of a basic reading of Zeus's will basically is cascading down, right? And the kings, like, through the kings. And the kings basically serve as these intermediaries for Zeus's will on earth, right? So just like this, like Zeus has to get something done. So therefore he sends this dream to Agamemnon. Agamemnon then is playing it out, and so Zeus's will is done through the kings. So the kings are very close to the gods, right? But you mentioned something about even more towards, like, is there a deeper read of this in the nature of Zeus himself and the kings? And you started to make a comparison there. Can you maybe parse that out for us?
Well, just in the relationship of what he actually asked and then what Agamemnon did to test.
Yeah, so how are Zeus and Agamemnon, like, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, they're close because Zeus rules the world through the kings, maybe whether they know it or not, or they know it, they like it or not. But how does Agamemnon's rule in book 2 and Zeus's rule like reflect one another.
Well, because they're both deceivers.
Yeah.
They're both deceiving each other. And ironically, that Zeus is deceiving Agamemnon, and then Agamemnon deceives his people, and the deception of to the people is actually more closer to reality than what it was from the deception of Zeus to Agamemnon.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, right? So yeah, just Zeus lies to Agamemnon, right? It's not true that the gods have stopped fighting. It's not true that Troy is primed for destruction. Like none of that's true. Actually, because of the promise made to Thetis, it's the exact opposite. Now we got to go through this whole nother rigmarole, right, before Troy falls. And then, yeah, Agamemnon turns around and treats his armies the same way that Zeus treats him.
Right.
But as you're absolutely correct, there's an irony there, right? Because when he says, oh, well, Zeus actually has committed brutal treachery on me, right? He's actually much more correct than he realizes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're dead on. And so there's this really interesting kind of like multiple layers here of when Odysseus talks about that the kings are close to the gods. Yes, they are through a certain agency of how Zeus's will is enacted, but on the other way, they tend to resemble his rule, right? In the way that he rules.
Right.
So, okay. No, very good. So, yeah, and it's the same thing. Actually, you can make an argument too with the dream, right? So when he's telling the dream, and dream actually tells him Zeus pities you. That also can be read similarly, right? Where dream knows that Agamemnon's being lied to,
right?
So Zeus pities you. If that even is true, it's not for the reason that he thinks. It's not because you've been here, slogging away for 10 years.
It feels bad for you.
Right. It's about that you're getting lied to and you're going to get used again.
Right.
So, again, kind of these multiple layers as we kind of understand Zeus. What about Odysseus? We've talked about him a little bit. He plays much more of a prominent role in book 2, right? Athena comes down to him. He's mustering the troops back. He's using that rhetoric.
Yeah, and I think this is what, I kind of hinted at this last week, but that I see Odysseus more of the rallying of the troops guy, the hype man, the guy who gets everybody's emotions flared up to go into battle, to charge into battle. Mm-hmm. And I think probably it's from this chapter, especially the first part of book 2, is he's like, guys, you idiots! He's already told us he was going to do this plan, and you guys are falling for it, and you know what the answer is. You know what his plan is, and you're still falling for it. You idiots! No, we're about to go in there and like let's rally the troops. Let's go in there and fight.
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree. Odysseus. Let's look at it when Athena comes to him. Right. There's some questions that I think we've been raising that are good. So let's kind of look. So this is around 200.
Okay.
So Athena has to come down because again, they don't like. So notice that the gods, right, even in the midst of Zeus telling them, hey, by the way, the gods have peace, as soon as Zeus does this, Hera and Athena have no idea what's happening. And so they've got to send Athena again down to try and fix things. And she goes immediately to Odysseus. And I think there's a certain intimacy here, right? Because she comes immediately, looking for Odysseus. She finds him first. And then, she's talking to him about basically like you need to use your winning words and you need to turn us around.
Yeah, she says she found Odysseus first, a mastermind like Zeus. Yes.
So let's look at that. The mastermind like Zeus. So, these little phrases, we've kind of looked at them, they're kind of hangovers, if you want to use that phrase, from it being oral poetry. My question is particularly maybe you as like coming to the text a little bit more raw, when you read, and I don't know if there's a distinction between your first read and now, but when you read that thing, a mastermind like Zeus, do you take that as a good statement or a bad statement?
No, I mean, I think it's very clear in book 1 that he can be deceived relatively easy.
Who can?
Zeus.
You think he can be deceived easily?
Well, I mean, Hera backs him up into a corner, and he has to result in threatening with violence to get her away from him.
Yeah.
At least it appears that, like you'd mentioned last week, is that Zeus, once he makes a commitment, it's set in stone. But then how you get around that being set in stone is distract Zeus, is to lie to Zeus, is to trick him, so that way you're kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting take. So he certainly can be deceived.
I mean, Zeus isn't known for being an intellect. He's known for being powerful.
I think that's interesting. I think it'd be interesting to see how that plays out as we move through the text. Like he certainly is powerful, right? Where he basically can tell the other gods, like, so what if you found out my plans? Like, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
The mastermind like Zeus, right? I think what we see here in the Iliad is he'll have these promises, these things he's doing, et cetera. Like, as the Iliad opened, right, is the will of Zeus always move towards its end?
Right.
Right. I think that's where that mastermind phrase comes from, is that no matter how these gods fight against it, no matter what happens, is Zeus's will always done? Mm-hmm. Right. Which I would argue probably the answer is yes. Right. But even in that, like, I'll tell you kind of like my knee-jerk reaction is like the first time I read this, like Odysseus, a mastermind like Zeus, I'm just like, man, Odysseus is just like the best person. Like he's just awesome. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, and also like I have like a certain, it's nice. Like he's the guy that like Athena comes down and finds, right? He's the guy that's closest to wisdom. He's a tactician. Look, he's trying to fix Agamemnon's mistakes. Like, I think there's a lot here to say, like, Odysseus is like a good person. Like, he's an admirable person, right? Like, and like a mastermind like Zeus. Notice that like Agamemnon's not getting that. Like, that's not his like praise. That's not the one he gets. It's Odysseus.
Right.
And, which might be why, as we mentioned in the summary, I just found it notable. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, but I just found it notable that, Odysseus turns all these men around, and plays his part via wisdom. Nestor kind of tacks on towards the end, and then Agamemnon thanks Nestor and doesn't thank Odysseus. Mm. And, again, if we kind of take this theory that like Homer doesn't really give us a lot of unnecessary details, or we take him seriously that he didn't just forget to thank Odysseus, like that's an intentional act.
Right, that's a definite intentional slight.
Yeah, so it's interesting that like, is he jealous? Like the mastermind like Zeus.
Of course he is.
Well, that's probably an easy ball in a tee of whether Agamemnon is jealous or,
right. It's same with him and Achilles being able to fight.
Right. So I think there's a lot of ways in which you look at the text, particularly in the beginning, and say like Odysseus is like a good character, right? Like he's amongst these men, he's certainly one of the best and most virtuous. My read this time, I'm not sure it's like a contrary read, but I had like a different question come up, which is, we just spent a whole lot of time talking about how, Zeus sends a murderous dream, a lie, an actual brutal treachery to Agamemnon. And then Agamemnon turns around and acts like Zeus by lying to his own men. And I just really had a question of like, whether is being called a mastermind like Zeus an actual positive?
Right, because if Zeus would have known that Agamemnon would have done that, he wouldn't have sent that dream.
You think so?
Well, it seems like it, because now Agamemnon lies to his troops, and now the truth is actually being played out, and that's not what Zeus wanted.
Yeah, I think if certainly, because I guess you could read it like that, because if they get in their ships and leave,
then he doesn't make good on his promise.
Right. Yeah, so I think I guess one of the things that stood out to me was, and maybe it's just an asterisk, is whether being compared to Zeus is actually a positive. Right. And then maybe there's a distinction too between maybe how the ancient Greeks would look at it as a positive, right? Particularly if it just comes down to raw power, or would we do this, and what does that mean for the character of Odysseus, right? So I think it's something to watch as we continue to watch his character kind of like unfurl in the text. So we have the Zeus and the kings. We have who is Odysseus. We see that. The other thing I wanted to mention on him, because you were right to point out that phrase, is that he knew the goddess's voice. So when Athena comes to him as wisdom, he knows her. He has an intimacy with her, right? He knows her voice. And this kind of then pushes the scales back, I think, a little bit, right? That like he knows this wisdom. And I think too, I mean, not to keep drilling down on this, but I just to show you, not show you, but I mean, just to show some of the depth that I think is here, is that I am curious as to, whether Homer is intentionally, which I would assume the answer is yes, like that phrase, like a mastermind like Zeus, and then which is couched in this narrative of Odysseus having this like intimacy, right, with Athena. Where does Athena come from?
Like from Zeus.
Yeah, particularly from where? She comes out of his head.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, so he's a mastermind like Zeus. Athena comes from the mind of Zeus, right? Like Zeus literally has like a migraine and his head's cracked open and out comes like, this goddess, halfway dressed for war who's also wisdom. And so it's interesting that I think there might be, I think it's notable, right? That in this context, he's called the mastermind of Zeus, has this intimacy with Athena, by knowing her voice, and she's also the goddess that came from his mind, right? Came from his head. I think there's a lot of layers going on here that we kind of have to.
That's good to know. Yeah, I didn't track all of that for sure.
That kind of, yeah. Also, we see her eyes again. We mentioned that previously, right? The bright-eyed goddess. So I think Athena, I think personally, like if you asked me where do I gravitate in the text, I'm probably more sensitive to the narratives that Athena's in, just because I find her a riveting character, right? She's a female goddess. She's associated with wisdom. However, she seems to have this kind of military streak about her, which we have to kind of understand as well, right? She wears like a helmet. She has a shield. There's a war side to her as well. And I think she's a multifaceted character that adds a lot of thickness, I think, to the text, if you will. So, okay, we'll sally forth, though, and move on. So, okay, Adam, would you like to tell us about the ugliest man? Would you like to tell us about the ugliest man who ever came to Troy?
Yeah, what a way to be introduced for all of like antiquity, like for all of time to be introduced as the ugliest man that whoever came to Troy. Yeah, Thersites. How do you say his name?
Sure, Thersites. Or Thersites.
Thersites.
Yeah, we can call him the ugliest man.
The ugliest man to ever come. Yeah. So when I first read this part, I thought that he was like a clown who kind of doesn't respect authority. And then as I reread it and like was trying to track the narrative, I think I kind of had a little bit of a change of heart. And I think that change of heart was kind of confirmed in our Great Books group, right? One of the guys kind of talked about how he was a representation of kind of the common man.
Yeah, so what do we have here? We have Odysseus. He's trying to round all the troops back. You can't run to the ships, etc. And here comes, Thersites, right?
Yeah.
The ugliest man who came to Troy. And he is, he's bandy-legged and clubbed-foot and shoulders sometimes. he's very clearly, he's
an ugly dude.
He's very, his skull warped to a point. Homer really clarifies this guy is really Olympic-level ugly.
Yeah.
So, but then, I had a similar thing where what I noted is, like kind of 270 to 280, he's critiquing Agamemnon. Right, home we go in our ships, abandon him here in Troy to wallow in all his prizes. He'll see if he likes us to have propped him up or not. Look now, Achilles, a greater man he disgraces. Right, seizes and keeps his prize, tears her away himself, but no gall in Achilles. Achilles lets it go. If not, Atrides, that outrage would have been your last. So my, like, kind of coupling what you said with like my observation was, my question was, is he wrong? Right, so he's clearly this ugly character. He's clearly railing against Agamemnon. But then I was like, I'm not sure. I'm sympathetic to his words. Agamemnon, like, is that how he's doing? Is this the type of ruler he is? And yeah, in our great books, someone made the comment, and on some commentary they had, kind of plumbed the depths of, that this character represents the common man. Right, so he's not godlike. He's not a beautiful, handsome person. He doesn't have this, my mom was a goddess or my father was Zeus, right? He is an ugly, common man. But here's the common man who can call out the high king.
Right.
And do so, I think, largely.
It's like he has nothing to lose. He's like, listen, I'm an ugly dude. I can say what I want. It's not like you can do anything to me.
Yeah, and and so he's calling out Agamemnon, this high king, and I think that if I recall correctly from our group, there was this thing that like there's a teaching moment from Homer here, right? If you really want to push into this, where he makes this character a comedy, right? Like he's so ugly, and we all
Right.
laugh at that.
But then relays some truth.
But he's putting the truth in the mouth of a commoner. But the only way he can do that is if he makes it comical,
Right.
right? And I think that Agamemnon's really not doing what he needs to be doing, and I think probably some of the response to this in support of it is I noticed that when Odysseus responds, so this is after 280, it's not an argument. It's not a rational argument back, meaning that he doesn't actually engage the substance of the debate, right? He says, well, this is why
It just shuts him
Agamemnon's...
up.
Yeah, this is an argument of ethos. This is one of character, right? Who are you to wrangle with kings? You alone. No one, I say, no one alive, less soldierly than you.
Again, so is Odysseus a mastermind like Zeus? I mean, this is not really an intellectual argument here.
Mm-hmm. Well, this becomes a power play, right? Because eventually he cracks down at 310, a little bit above that, right? He cracks the scepter across his back and shoulders, and
So he resorts to physical
yeah, it's a
power.
It reduces back to power, right? So there's a little bit of a rhetorical thing at the beginning. It doesn't work. He then smashes him across the shoulders. He has this bloody welt bulged up. Blah 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 blah. If you wanted to, it could be a stretch. You can make some comparisons here between Zeus and Hera, right? And how Zeus interacts with Hera, right? Where there's some rhetoric in the beginning. At the end, it's like, listen, I'll just strangle you, right? Be quiet. And it becomes a comedy, right? The morale was low, but the men laugh now. So this is one of those texts that this is my third read, and I think it's only on the third read that I actually appreciate it, right? It's always caught me by, not surprise, but it's like one of those things that you look at, I know there's more here, but I don't know what.
Right.
Like Homer's not just bored and inserting like, oh, by the way, here's the ugliest guy alive.
Right.
Like, what's happening here? I really do like the theory that like this captures the commoner, the common man, having an accurate read on things and critiquing those who are doing wrong, but they're above his station. And so Homer presents it as a comedy, particularly because keep in mind his audience are the aristocrats, right? Not the commoners.
Right.
So, and I think this is really, in a lot of ways, maybe our first introduction or maybe a good example to Homer teaching his audience, which I think is really key for understanding the Iliad, right? He's actually passing on a lesson here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't catch that the first time. I mean, I wasn't sure. The beauty of reading text together with a group.
Exactly. Yeah. No, iron sharpens iron, right? Yeah. So on my read, like my third read through, I was like, man, there's something here. Like, look, he gives this response, how Odysseus does, etc. But then, when our buddy commented on like him being a representative of the common man, it just seemed to make all the puzzle pieces come together, right? And so, clicking puzzles. So we're good. Okay,
so then Odysseus has this interesting thing on like about 340 where he's talking to everybody and says any fighter cut off from his wife for a month in war. Basically, he's talking about like, listen, typically we go to war for like not more than a month, and now we realize we're going from 1 month, and this is we're in the 9th year. This is how long this has been. 9th year comes around, the 9th we've hung in here.
Yeah.
And like basically say like what humiliation it would be to hold on so long and then at the very end in the 11th hour to go home empty-handed. What are you guys thinking? And so to me this is Odysseus rallying the troops, trying to get them to go like, guys, we've been doing this, we've invested 9 years and you guys are wanting to sail home now? Like how embarrassing would that be to go home empty-handed after and have nothing to show for over 9 years, when typically when we go to war, it's less than a month.
Yeah, no, and you bring up this point too. Earlier you raised, when we gave our summary at the beginning, we talked about the omen. And you kind of raised the question of, well, when did they know about the omen? Mm-hmm. Right? So another way, is Odysseus like just now informing them that like, by the way, like endure because it's we're in the 10th year, right? They've completed 9 years. We're in the 10th year. Like it should be happening soon. Mm-hmm. Like, is this something new? Or is this something like they all knew like from the outset? And I think that answer It's a good question. It's not one that I really thought about. But if you look at like 350 and go down, this is where he starts talking about the omen. And if you look, he says, why it seems like only yesterday or the day before when our vast armada gathered moored at Aulis, Aulis, Aulis. I have to look it up. Anyway, that I'm pretty sure that is the same island that when they says moored on, that was the same island they were trapped at because of Artemis. Right? So my point there being is that this omen, right, of like the 10th year and like the snake eating the sparrows and whatever, and Calchas giving like, hey, this is what's going to happen, that actually happened like right at the beginning. Like they went into this knowing like, well, I guess not into this. They got halfway on their journey and realizing like, oh, this is going to be a decade-long
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't have done it
process.
otherwise, right?
Probably not.
Odds are.
Yeah, you would think maybe not. Let me just look real fast back on our guide. Yeah, it's the same island. So that's the one in which Artemis trapped them. So while they were on there, they have this omen that they're going to, which, it's a snake devoured the sparrow with her brood, ate. This is between 380 and 390. As a snake devoured the sparrow with her brood, ate, and the mother made ninth, she born them all. So we will fight in Troy that many years, and then in the 10th, we'll take her broad streets. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're told this on the way. So Odysseus is reminding them, like, why are you dum-dums running back to your ships? Like, we only have a little bit more to endure. And then we have, what's promised to us by Zeus. So this is another, by the way, this is then another promise by Zeus, right? Or at least an interpretation of a prophecy. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we get the head nod certainty here, that you guys have 10 years to labor here. Then your boy Nestor comes in.
Good old Nestor.
He gives his speech, and that's fine.
He's rallying the troops.
Yeah, let's. So I just maybe I take too much enjoyment in poking holes in your view of Nestor, but let's look at 420, right? So let's just hear his wholesome advice on why they should
I didn't say
fight.
he gives wholesome advice.
No, I heard you. You was like, this is the grandfatherly figure of the Iliad, like good old grandpa.
World War II type of grandfather.
Never does anything wrong. That's what I heard.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So now let no man hurry to sail for home, not yet, till he beds down with a faithful Trojan wife. Payment in full for the groans and shocks of war we have all borne for Helen.
Has to be a faithful one.
Yeah, that is
has to be a faithful Trojan
That's a loaded metaphor there, or a modifier. Yeah. So anyway, that's so.
I mean, again, he's trying to show them like, hey, we're close. Like
he means well.
The spoil. Yeah, I'm not saying that the end justifies the means here.
He means well. I mean, it's just he has to motivate the men. So just the Trojan wives, they just it's a motivation.
Right.
It works. Okay. No, I'm just kind of pushing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then like you mentioned that King Agamemnon praises Nestor.
Yeah, he doesn't praise Odysseus, which it's a
then blames Zeus.
Yeah. Zeus, that's what is that? That's right after. That's between 440 and 450.
Yeah.
By Cronus' son, Zeus with the shield of storm insists on embroiling me in painful struggles, futile wars of words. Yeah, he does blame him. So then he switches, right? And then he says, any man I catch, X, Y, and Z. So there is one thing I want to note before we move on, which is if we go back to the quote I read from Nestor, we'll leave poor Nestor alone.
Okay.
But this is several times in this book, and we've already had some already in book 1, is mentioned Helen.
Yes.
And we have not received yet a robust understanding of who Helen is. In book 3, we'll get a little bit more of like who she is, some clarity, etc. So maybe just like by way of like a preliminary introduction, like, what do you know about Helen and her backstory?
Well, I don't want to give too much away. I'm not sure what parts I can say now that won't be giving away in book 3.
Okay, let's just do what I think.
Where is that?
It's a little after 420 is when she's mentioned. She's mentioned at line 189, 420 or 423, and 682. In this chapter. So she's one of these.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So she's in these things when she's like, wait, who is this? Like, who's Helen? and what is her relationship to the war, which again is something that we're going to have to play out. Yeah, the one in 400s and the one in 600s, both are like, we're bearing the shocks of war, the groans for Helen, right? So Helen, what we know about her like backstory right now, then we'll see what gets more robustly set forward in book 3. She is her father is Zeus. Okay, so her father is Zeus. Her mother was married to the king of Sparta. So her, if you want to say her earthly father, if you want to use that language, or foster, whatever you want to say, is the king of Sparta, right? And she is beyond gorgeous. She is divinely beautiful, like rivaling Aphrodite, etc.
Smoking hot.
Right. That's exactly how the Greeks would have said it. So then but the problem is, as beauty does, is that literally everyone in ancient Greece wants to marry her. So all these suitors from all these different city-states are petitioning the king of Sparta to marry his daughter. And he probably rightly understands that if he picks one or the other, or if he gives her someone, war is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And he does not want
People
to
are going to be mad.
Right. Like, and he does not want to get destroyed. So he can't figure out what to do about all these suitors. So he actually turns to our mastermind like Zeus. He turns to Odysseus and asks Odysseus what to do about the suitors. So Odysseus tells him and gives him what was probably wise advice, or at least it solved his problem, practical advice, that what you should do is that you should just bind them all to an oath. It says, I'm not going to pick anyone until all these suitors agree that, like, we will all collectively defend the marriage of Helen. So, like, if I give her to so-and-so, and then so-and-so tries to come and steal her or attack or whatever, like, all of Greece will, like, attack on her behalf.
Making pacts.
Right. So, like, they agree. And so then he picks a prince, Menelaus, who is actually Agamemnon's brother, and sets him up then to become king of Sparta. And so that's kind of like the preliminary backstory right now. And so then in book 3, we're going to see Homer's going to play that out then about, okay, so why are they all now in Troy? Why is this war, right, on behalf of Helen? Or why are they bearing the shocks and groans of war for Helen, right? But the oath that Helen's father, or earthly father, had them all be binded by the suitors be bound to, is not in the Iliad. Homer never explains that, right? So it's worth kind of mentioning. There's also, as a side note, it is also a foreshadowing of Odysseus. Odysseus, too, when he gets to the Odyssey, will have his own problem with suitors. So he actually answers one for the king of Sparta, and then later on, he's going to actually have his own problem with suitors that he's going to have to resolve himself.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
Okay. So that's a good, maybe just kind of appetizer on who Helen is. Okay, now to your favorite part. Adam's favorite part so far of the entire Iliad, right? The roll call. So the entire, like, back half of book 2 is basically a, like, roll call of who is here on behalf of the Achaeans, and then a very short, similar roll call for who is here on the back of, on behalf of the Trojans.
Yeah. So right before that, though, just to throw this out there. So we had Agamemnon blaming Zeus, for all those troubles. Then he kind of starts rallying the troops, and then he like threatens them if they don't fight.
Right.
Then there's a sacrifice that happens for the war. Right. He prays to Zeus. Zeus doesn't answer his prayer yet. Then you got good old boy Nestor rallying the troops up again. Right. Trying to get them all excited, and then there's a momentum shift. Then they're all. Now suddenly, this is on like in between 5:30 and 5:40. It says, now suddenly, battle thrilled them more than the journey home, than sailing hollow ships to their dear native land. So now that all of a sudden they've gone from let's get out of here to no, let's go to battle.
Yeah, their battle lust is
back.
Yeah, it's been nurtured
by our good old boy Nestor.
Nestor saves the day again.
Yeah.
Notice too that this is some of that imagery that I told you that I really enjoy. Athena gets ready for war with them, right? So here she is, and she's going to don her armor and get ready for war as well. And so this is around a little bit above 530. Down their ranks, the fiery-eyed Athena bore her awesome shield of storm, ageless, deathless, 100 golden tassels, all of them braided tight. So again, not only is she getting ready for war, but she also kind of gives us this picture of the tasseled shield, like this thing that kind of challenges some of our imagery of kind of what we think the armor looks like.
Right.
But I've always enjoyed these images of her getting ready to fight in the war.
Yeah.
So
then we get the list of armies.
The list of armies.
It basically starts, right around 585 or so. Is when it seems to really start. Now, so let me ask you, why? Why do we have all these lists of guys? It's basically like this guy who sailed this ship from this place.
Right.
He's here, and then this guy came, and then this guy came, and
so I think we should acknowledge, we should acknowledge that I think for a lot of people, and particularly for first-time readers, this section has all the charm and delight of like a biblical genealogy,
or like watching paint dry.
Right. I mean, it's somewhat mind-numbing, and that's always dangerous, right, in the Iliad, because then you're going to miss details.
Right. And
So-
no doubt I have missed details through this.
Well, one of the things too that I think immediately should alert us to like something more than just a roll call is happening here is the fact that it begins again with an invocation to the muses. So if you look right after
That's a
570,
good point.
right? Sing to me now, you muses who hold the halls of Olympus. You are the goddesses. You are everywhere. You know all things, right? Who basically like who are the captains and who are the kings. So something's going on here that's actually very important because the muses are being invoked again. So let's parse out maybe just list a few things I think is going on. Okay. One, it's an aristocratic audience, as we mentioned.
Right.
They draw their lineages back to these people. Like, this is a giant, like, you can almost imagine them all being in the hall, like, feasting, hearing this, and, like, people cheering or making some sign of oath and fidelity when their ancestors are named, right? So there's, like, which I understand is an imaginative exercise, but, like, you have to realize that there's a connection between Homer's current audience and the people in this text, right? These are my ancestors. So it's very important for them that they understand, like, this person came from this person, here's who was with him, and here's how many ships he brought, and X, Y, and Z. So just for his audience, I think this has a lot of merit and a lot of value.
Yeah.
The other thing, which I don't think merits an invocation to the muses, I think what I would suggest actually merits the invocation to the muses is that Greece is not a nation. It's certainly not a modern nation state as we think about it. It's not even a kingdom. It's not an empire. It is a loose federation of city-states that are basically like always at war with one another. And so...
Yeah, they don't even speak the same language.
Correct. So one of the things I think to think about here is that one of the reasons that Homer is doing this and why he invokes the muses is that this is a unified Greece. Greece has unified under a single cause, and this is something to celebrate. This is something to invoke the divine goddesses on, right? Look, we can come together, right? Because basically, the life between the city-states, the norm was war.
Right.
The norm was antagonism. All these guys have fought against each other, right? Like, so for them to all unite in one cause, right, is actually a point of celebration. It's a point of, and think about his current audience. Hey, idiots, stop all fighting each other.
Right.
Like, look, our ancestors united, and look, they united and took down a great cause. So,
That's a good point.
I realize
Yeah.
it's not like a great read.
No, that's a good point.
So some other things, if we're listing out its purposes, it actually serves as the formal introduction. So we talked about in media res, we started the middle story. So now, we're...
A lot of people we get introduced to just for them to die.
Correct.
Which is awesome.
Correct. So, we're what, like 1,200, more than that, lines deep into the Iliad, and we're getting our character introductions.
Sure, yeah.
So something, we don't need to parse out all of these, but a few things. One, there are two people named Ajax.
Yeah, that is a good. Yeah, that is something good. And there's the greater and the lesser, so to speak. The great and the little. I don't remember what they called it, but
Yeah, little Ajax and great Ajax or Telamonian Ajax is the great one. And the reason that we need to mention this is basically later on, it will mention not only who's all there, but who are the greatest warriors. And it mentions that Achilles is by far the best.
Towers over all of them.
Yeah, like just by a long shot. And then the second is
Telamonian Ajax.
Yeah, is the great Ajax. And so he's the second. So we're
That's
also
about 870 or so, about 873 or 4.
Yeah, very good. So then we get around 680, we're going to get Menelaus. And remember that narrative we said, because now his own, this is like 681, and his own heart blazed the most to avenge the groans and shocks of war they borne for Helen. Mm-hmm. So this is Helen's husband, and we're trying to figure out, what has happened. And so we get this, explicit connection, with Helen, and we've already talked about her. Then, let's see, we get Odysseus. Again, he's called the mastermind like Zeus in 730. Then we get another invocation to the Muses, right? If we haven't figured this out already, between 770 and 780, we get another invocation to the Muses. And this one, again, is about Achilles, right? And it's interesting if there's
Let's get the handsomest man to ever come to Troy. Did you know this? Like we just talked about the ugly dude.
He's the most handsome.
The handsomest man who ever came to Troy. That's on.
What line is that?
769. Nereus, or I don't know how you say his name.
Oh yeah, we do get some guy. No, I missed that one. Oh, say we have the handsomest guy. That's important.
So we know that we got the ugliest. We got the most attractive. It's good to know.
Good. We have Achilles now, who is the the bravest, the most ready for war. A little after 790, right? It says Achilles lays there now, but he will soon rise up in all his power, right? So again, he's hanging out by his ships, presumably not still crying, but he is there. Then we get a third invocation to the Muses. There are 3 invocations to the Muses in this book. So, I mean, it's hard to express how important I think this is for Homer. The third one is after 860, between 860 and 870. And this is where he shifts from the general roll call to what we've already mentioned, which is the bravest of them all, right? Who are they? And so then, as we mentioned, Achilles is number 1 by a long shot, and then Telamonian Ajax is number 2. Mm-hmm. Then we get a short roll call from the Trojans. We get introduced to Hector. Hector is the son of King Priam. Priam is the king of Troy, the city-state of Troy. Hector is his son, one of 50, I think. And Hector, though, he is the main general, the main marshal of the armies.
The shiny helmet.
Yeah, so Hector misses nothing, right? Because Iris, which is a messenger god. Now, this is interesting. So earlier when we talked about, I think in a previous episode, on knowing your mythology, but also the fact that the mythology shifts. It's not stagnant. So in the Iliad, Iris she's the messenger god. She's the one running around. Mm-hmm. By the classical Greek time, it's Hermes. He's got like wings on his feet, on his shoes.
Right. Yeah.
He's always around. He makes an appearance in here more as a guardian, someone who accompanies someone, which is somewhat fitting because he also accompanies the dead down to Hades. But he's not the general messenger. Iris is, and then Iris kind of drifts away in a lot of ways in classical mythology. But if you're wondering who is Iris, she's the messenger goddess. So notice that Hector also, when Iris comes to him, Hector also immediately recognizes her as a divine. Mm-hmm. Again, looking at that capacity, which men have the capacity to understand the gods are speaking to them, even if the gods take on different forms, right? Mm-hmm. They can see them for who they are. It says Hector missed nothing. Mm-hmm. Just a few lines up from 920. So we get Hector. We also get Aeneas, which is a character that we also need to put an asterisk by, that's well known into the tradition. So Aeneas, and he is the son of Aphrodite. Mm-hmm. So we get another...
He'll play a key role here pretty quick.
Yeah, Aeneas plays a key role in the Iliad and then plays a larger role in Roman mythology. So this is the beginning of his myth, if you will, is right here on these lines. We also have Sarpedon, which is down a little past, it's right around before, actually it's the last couplet there in that book. That I mentioned him because he's actually a son of Zeus.
But before that we have Nastes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about
Good
him.
old Nastes.
Oh yes. Yeah, go ahead.
He strolled into battle decked in gold like a girl. The fool. Yeah. He's has really bad decorum.
Yeah, and down he went, crushed by the racing Achilles' hands, destroyed at the ford where the battle-hard Achilles stripped his gold away. Yeah, so we've got one guy that went in the battle decked in gold like a girl, and Achilles just handed it to him.
Yeah.
And then, the last character there, as I mentioned.
He deserved it.
That could be true.
So
the only other thing that I would mention is the sacrifice that Agamemnon makes to Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We see these sacrifices in the text a lot, and so can we is there a better understanding that we can have of them? And so I want to read, just because I think this played out well. I just want to read this section of our guide.
Okay.
About what of the sacrifice made to Zeus in book 2. So Agamemnon prays to Zeus for victory, and Zeus denies his prayer, at least for now. It is not unremarkable that Agamemnon, as high king, offers the prayer and sacrifice to Zeus. He offers the fat and bones to Father Zeus, while the meat is feasted upon by man. The allotment of the sacrifices finds its genesis in a myth of the Titan Prometheus. In addition to giving mankind the divine gift of fire, Prometheus also tricked Zeus into choosing the bones and fat as the portion due to him. As Zeus's will is unalterable, man may retain the best of the sacrifice for his own feast. So think about this for a second. So Prometheus is a Titan. He's a Titan, if I recall correctly, that sided with the gods in the wars between the gods and the Titans. So then he was allowed to endure after that. But then he ends up having a fondness for humanity. So he's most famous, and where he's used kind of like colloquially, right? This is a Promethean, you hear that term sometimes, this is a Promethean thing, is that mankind was basically this sad, cold, miserable creature on Earth that couldn't cook anything, couldn't make anything, had no light, these things.
Right.
And Prometheus is a Titan that went up to Olympus and stole fire right from the hearth and took it back down to man and gave man fire. Right. Which then he was aptly punished for, right? He's famously chained to the side of a mountain, and an eagle comes and eats his liver every day, and his liver grows back, and then he gets eaten again, right? So
sounds terrible.
It is terrible. So there's another narrative, though, that when Zeus was deciding what parts of the animal will become mine, Prometheus becomes the intermediary between the two. And basically, he takes the bones and puts it all underneath the fat, basically all the useless parts, and puts the fat on top, making it look like that's where the choice meat would be. And then on the other one, basically puts all the meat and hides it under the skin and like other things that you wouldn't want. And so when Zeus comes down to pick what he wants, he picks the one with the fat and bones. And he's been deceived. And so, again, his will is unalterable. So even though he's done this, so I think this is intriguing because, as our guide explains, like recalling Agamemnon's murderous dream and his subsequent test of his men, it seems fitting that not even the religious justice of the ancient Greeks, i.e. giving the gods what is due to them, is free from cunning and deceit. Right? So in this whole book, we've seen that like Zeus will trick his own kings and work through them, and then they trick other people, and et cetera. Right? Like here he is working his mastermind, and now even in the myth of man giving, what is due to the gods, it's not free from a story of trickery and deceit.
Right.
Which I think just shows you how much this actually kind of seeps down into this culture. Right, about power, and if you're facing power, the answer to that is trickery and deceit. And to finish that off, one of the things I think we should note on a more positive tone, the sacrifice bears both a horizontal and vertical dimension. Thus, the sacrificial act binds both the gods and man then man as man together. It's a political cosmic act. right? So you see that vertical and that horizontal dimension, right? So it makes peace, hopefully, right, between man and the gods, between man and Zeus. But then the second part of that is that they get the feast. And so then there's this harmony amongst the men as well. And I mention that because, man carries something, a natural virtue of religion, right? Man naturally wants to give to God his due, right? It doesn't take a supernatural act to do that. And so here, even in this, obscured pagan play out of how this works, even when it's marred by deceit, you still see that sacrifice is supposed to make harmony both vertically and horizontally, which is the same thing that we see in the Mass, right? We offer the Son to the Father in the Holy Spirit. We have that vertical, right, relationship in which we're offering the Son to him, and we're part of that body, right? So through him, we are saved. But then we come and we receive, and we together, right, have that feast on the altar, that Eucharistic feast as part of that sacrifice. And so then there's a horizontal dimension of us all coming together, not as bodies of Christ, but as the body of Christ, right? Yeah. So it's interesting that even in this pagan text, through all the layers of obscurity, you can see a true nature of sacrifice in man.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, again, the importance of reading the book with another person. So I'm grateful to read it with you, Deacon, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. You can check us out at thegreatbookspodcast.com. Check out the notes that we've been going through. Leave us a review and subscribe to our podcast. Share it with some of your friends. Anything else?
No, I think we're good. I enjoyed it.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.